Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 131. Fear my immortal behavior. The old scholar realized that Jun Moxie was timing his interruptions well, and was only interjecting the flow of the discussion when the gathering was trying to steer the topic towards the strength of the Jun family. Instead of answering delicate questions about the strength of the Jun family, Jun Moxie would suddenly start talking nonsense, and would end up nauseating the other men on the table. And as a result, no one would carry the subject any further. However, he couldn't tell if this was intentional or unintentional. This debauchee may not be as simple as we think. Fang Bo Wen shook his head as he thought to himself. But either way, it seems that the second prince is bound to return empty-handed today. However, is this approach Jun Moxie's own decision, or was it taken by his family? Answering this question is going to be a tough job. Hey, second prince today, is there any other plan in addition to drinking? This wine party has been fun, but it would be pointless if we didn't have more fun afterwards. Jun Moxie put on a wretched smile on his face, as he stood up with a slam sound. His actions were becoming more distasteful with every passing minute, and he had even started referring to the second prince as second prince instead of His Highness as before. There might have been other plans for later, but the second prince had already cancelled all other plans after seeing Jun Moxie's behavior. Naturally, the second prince didn't wish to associate himself with such indecent people publicly. In a span as short as the course of a meal, Jun Moxie had left him feeling angry enough to vomit blood, and not to mention hopelessly and helplessly embarrassed. Jun Moxie was secretly relieved to see that everyone had already given up on promoting their political and diplomatic agendas. He stood up grinning, and twisted his waist as he walked over towards the pearl curtain partition where Lady Yuer was playing her lute. He had come to the Ni Chang pavilion for her, so how could he let her slip by? You little woman, alone, would dare to think of destroying the Jun family. The last time when Jun Moxie had seen Lady Yuer, she had unknowingly revealed her deep-seated hatred for the Jun family. Jun Moxie was already somewhat afraid of this woman since she was very well connected in the society and quite quick-witted, and on top of that, a very accomplished martial artist. Moreover, even though the second prince was trying to keep his distance from her, she could end up in his arms one day. Would the second prince be able to keep his innocence when faced with the charms of a brothel's prostitute? This statement seemed a bit ridiculous, and Jun Moxie could sense that this woman might turn into a major threat later. Jun Moxie had no doubts that this woman might have some plans, and was even suspecting that she may have other people supporting her secretly from the dark. This suspicion had been growing stronger and stronger in the young Master Jun's heart, and he had finally decided to do something about it. This was his main objective behind visiting the Ni Chang pavilion today. But who is this unknown enemy, which is patiently waiting in the dark? The Jun family has been slowly growing in strength, and there will obviously be some factions that might try to hinder our growth. But if I eliminate them, then the Jun family will grow unrestrained. If I let her get away this time, then with the growth of the Jun family's strength, she might go into hibernation, and even her backers might become passive. But if I kill her, and that too publicly, then the enemy will conceal themselves with even more vigor, which could be a very unfavorable situation as well. Lady Yuer, you're looking really pretty. Hey! Jun Moxie made no attempts to conceal his perverted desire, as his eyes shamelessly eyed her body before coming to a stop at her breasts. Lady Yuer suddenly felt as if an invisible pair of hands was touching her body inappropriately, but she couldn't say it out loud. She looked at him coldly and said, "Young Master Jun, please behave courteously." There's no need to. Being the son of a big family has its benefits. Tang Yuan is an example of that. Jun Moxie broke into laughter. He broke through the partition, paying no attention to her rejection in his interests. Young Master Jun, although Yuer works in a brothel, I'm not a prostitute, but an entertainer. Please try to understand. Lady Yuer stated in a cold voice. I will give you really good money. Why wouldn't you sell yourself? The girl should remember that the young Master Jun has been kind to her in the past as well. Jun Moxie's face shamelessly reminded her of their past interactions. At this point, everyone could tell that this debauchee had been with Lady Yuer before. In fact, most men were assuming that he would have forced himself on her in the past as well. They were finally beginning to realize why Jun Moxie had an unparalleled reputation as a debauchee. But now the biggest issue at hand was what to do with Lady Yuer. This banquet is being hosted by His Royal Highness, the Second Prince. If Jun Moxie did something untoward, then it would bring bad name to the Second Prince. If this issue came into the public knowledge, then there might be a large outrage. Everyone was thinking the same thing, and had already halted feasting on their wines. This was a rare and unusual situation, since the bully was none other than a son of the great Jun family. What is he going to do with Lady Yuer now? If Lady Yuer hastily rejected this debauchee, then this guy might immediately retaliate. Could a lowly establishment like the Nichang Pavilion bear retaliation from the great Jun family? But if she doesn't refuse his advances, then would she actually allow him to take unfair advantage of herself? The young Master Jun is surely being *RNY beyond control. Everyone looked at each other in dismay, unable to decide on a course of action. The second prince intervened and said, Young Master Jun, Lady Yuer is a musician, and of noble character. This is the first time that you're meeting her. Please don't embarrass the lady. His address to Jun Moxie had changed from little brother to young Master Jun. Embarrass? How am I doing that? This is a place of business. What's so noble about that? Ha ha ha. If I don't take such interests in her, then what will happen to her livelihood? This is what she does for a living since she's already sold herself into slavery. Don't pay any attention to her. She's just teasing me since she likes me. Why else would she play hard to get? Jun Moxie was obviously carrying a drunken look on his face, and didn't seem to be bothered by anyone's objections. He continued to watch Lady Yuer's body with perverted thoughts on his mind. Lady Yuer fiercely stared back at Jun Moxie, but her stomach was beginning to feel a drum beat. Young Master Jun, I might be an employee here, but I don't offer my body in service. Don't offer your body in service? Ha ha ha, in a brothel. Ah. Do you know what this place is? A brothel. Okay. You're saying that you work in a brothel but you don't offer your body in service? This is really funny. Ha ha ha, this is a brothel. There are no noble characters here. And you're asking the son of the Jun family to behave in such a place? Jun Moxie seemed very proud of his perverted behavior. Lady Yuer bit her lips in anger, and it seemed as if she was almost contemplating killing this hateful hedonistic son of the Jun family. Even if you were the last man on this planet, I still wouldn't fancy you. She looked across the pearl curtain and saw the ash-faced prince, and suddenly came up with an idea. Heir, please save me. Lady Yuer panicked and ran out through the curtain, with the intention of getting to Prince's side. Even though her footsteps were staggering, her speed was still quite fast. So much so that even a level 9 expert wouldn't have been able to intercept her. But against her expectation, Jun Moxie suddenly darted sideways with his arms wide open, and suddenly gripped her delicate and feminine body in his embrace. He continued to laugh as his cat-like palms brushed onto her breasts and stated to forcefully fondle them. He smiled as said, "Such a beauty. Don't resist, don't struggle. Gee, you're so pretty. There's no need to be shy here." Lady Yuer had heard the rumors that Jun Moxie wasn't capable of cultivating his xian qi, which is why she had never expected that he would actually be able to exhibit such agility to intercept her. Even though Jun Moxie was one step ahead of her, she still hadn't expected him to catch her since she had ducked sideways, but had ended up landing in his embrace with a thud. Is this a coincidence? But isn't this too much of a coincidence? Jun Moxie's hands continued to swim all over the angered and embarrassed Lady Yuer's body, who was almost on the verge of fainting with fury. Everyone's face was clearly depicting the disgust of their hearts. How could someone be this indecent to a woman in the presence of the second prince? What kind of behavior is this? Even if we are in a brothel, the young Master Jun is still crossing his limits. Jun Moxie. Let Lady Yuer go. Chengde shouted as he rushed up towards them. Lady Yuer took advantage of the opening and broke free of Jun Moxie's embrace. Her eyes were full of tears of anger and indignation, and she waved her hand and slapped Jun Moxie straight across the face. Even though Lady Yuer didn't employ the complete extent of her xian qi in the slap, it was still a lot to take for Jun Moxie's body. Pop! Everyone froze in their footsteps. Lady Yuer's hand had not only hit its target, but had hit Jun Moxie straight across the face, and as a result, left the mark of her 5 fingers on his face, which was already beginning to swell from the strike. Everyone stood halted in their steads, unable to fathom any measures to respond to this change of events. B*TCH. You're not a noble woman, just a prostitute. Don't you have any ethics? How dare you slap and deface me? Jun Moxie hopped towards her as he cursed, and raised his foot to kick her, but found his way obstructed by a man. Chengde said, "Young Master Jun, why are you losing your temper over this mere brothel woman?" Chengde was somehow able to prevent his face from being distorted by the dislike he felt for Jun Moxie. Even though his mind was advising against it, he still wished to strangle Jun Moxie to death at this point. Get out of my way. I will kill this little B*TCH today. How dare she slap me? Jun Moxie shouted angrily. Jun Moxie. You have to understand the circumstances. This banquet was organized by His Royal Highness, the second prince. We are all his guests. Would you cause His Royal Highness shame in the public eye? Chengde stared at him. Strange awe. How would teaching this prostitute a lesson equivalent to defacing the second prince in the public eye, huh? Chengde, what are you trying to say? Are you trying to say that this little B*TCH slapped me on the second prince's orders? Jun Moxie flipped his eyes in accusation. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 132. Killing a chicken to scare the monkeys. That was an outrageous presumption. Lady Yuer was just. Chengde halted in the middle of his sentence as a chill ran down his spine. Was just? What? Jun Moxie broke into an unbridled laughter. He twitched his lips and said, "Since she's brothel woman, what kind of an entertainment could she provide if we can't even touch her body, huh? I'm being considerate towards her profession by showing interests in her, and she offends me in this manner? You're destroying the reputation of your family." Chengde's eyes were reeking of contempt for the young Master Jun Moxie. You're really forcing me to hate and despise you. Chengde was suddenly feeling very proud of his own self at this moment. People have often said that I'm an insult to my family's name, But I haven't done anything even remotely as shameful as Jun Moxie. Qingde Chao, F***ku. What did you just say? You despise me? You and I are cut from the same cloth. And remember that I can eliminate your entire family if you insult me again. Jun Moxie furiously tightened his neck and slanted his eyes. Qingde Chao. Go back to your mother and let her nurse you up a bit. Qingde Chao's entire body started to tremble with rage. And his crimson eyes looked up at Jun Moxie again, while his hand landed on the hilt of his sword with a pop. Clang, he unsheathed about 3 inches of his sword and exposed its metal's cold radiance. Jun Moxie, the sullied second prince, stood up. You're drunk. Perhaps you should go back home early today. I've barely had a few mouthfuls of wine. How could I be drunk? Jun Moxie snorted as he titled his neck towards the second prince, unwilling to agree, and now this sissy has just unsheathed his sword in threat. I'm saying you're drunk. It means you're drunk, the second prince finally snapped, unable to tolerate it anymore. Fang Bo Wen hastily rushed towards the prince and gently pressed hand against the prince's shoulder. Jun Moxie raised his eyes to meet the second prince's gaze. The two men continued to gaze into each other's eyes for a while, before Jun Moxie crooked his mouth and smiled again. Since the second prince says that Jun Moxie is drunk, then I'm drunk, he, even if I haven't had enough wine. I'm still drunk. Ha ha ha. This is funny. Really funny. He continued to laugh as he reached out to grab a cup of wine and smashed into the floor beside Lady Yuer. The cup broke, and crisp sound made everyone's face twitch in surprise. Jun Moxie fiercely pointed a finger at Lady Yuer and said, You little slut. Today we are in presence of the second prince. And since the second prince is speaking in your favor, I'm letting you go for now. But I'll come back for you later someday. Jun Moxie subconsciously rubbed his crotch to indicate his nefarious desires. Jun Moxie turned around and faced Qingde Chao. He slowly extended his hand and reached out towards Qingde Chao's face. Clap, clap. He patted Qingde Chao's face twice, producing a crisp sound, and said, So you want to kill me, huh? Really? Qingde Chao. Drawing even half a sword is indicative of war. You will behave yourself in the future. Understand? Then, he turned around as he continued to laugh, waved his hand, almost like he was trying to wave away the atmospheric dust, twisted his hips, and quickly left. He had made a mess out of the second prince's feast. He insulted the prince's company to the point where the prince had to personally threaten retaliation. Firstly, he had managed to abuse Qingde Chao, and had in general been very vulgar and disrespectful. By being rampantly arrogant and aggressive, Jun Moxie had lived up to the reputation of being the city's most notorious debauchee. Jun Moxie reached downstairs and sat inside his palanquin. Surprisingly, there were 2 more men inside his palanquin, who were both dressed in black-colored clothes. Jun Moxie sighed and said, After I leave, you will pay close attention to the movements inside the Ni Chang Pavilion. You will also keep an eye on the people the second prince meets after he leaves, while the other person will continue to watch the Ni Chang Pavilion, and will keep track of the people who enter and exit the place. And do not slack one bit. Both men nodded. The palanquin started to sway as the young Master Jun left for his residence. Although today's events hadn't gained any concrete results, it had still been a very fruitful trip. On one hand, Jun Moxie had lived up to his public reputation, but secondly and more importantly, he had publicly insulted and embarrassed the woman the second prince had been showing interest in. So this trip had definitely been worthwhile. Jun Moxie certainly knew that even though Lady Yuer was working in a brothel, she wasn't exactly a prostitute. In fact, He could tell that she didn't think very highly of the profession, and was wondering if she was an expert in disguise. Jun Xie was convinced that Lady Yuer would retaliate. In fact, Jun Xie was hoping for it. Now the situation was turning favorable for Jun Xie. Since Jun Xie had overheard Lady Yuer and Lord Lu's conversation the other night, he already knew the identity of his enemies. But they weren't aware that Jun Xie was also targeting them. Therefore, Lady Yuer would certainly try to avenge this insult without being aware of Jun Xie's ulterior motives. But it didn't just stop here. Jun Xie had accomplished another third feat. Today, he had built a wall between the second prince and Lady Yuer by insulting her in front of him. The second prince hadn't reacted firmly, and hadn't been able to impose his dominance properly, which would have left Lady Yuer very disappointed. If a man can't even protect the woman he is trying to pursue, then would he still be able to call himself a man? Especially in this case, when the man was powerful enough to protect her. But since he didn't take the initiative, their relationship would inevitably suffer. If Jun Xie had been in the prince's shoes, then he would have certainly charged screaming, "This is my woman. Keep your hands off her." But the second prince hadn't. At least not boldly. In fact, even Jun Xie was looking down upon the prince. Is my wealth and position of that much importance? In fact, even Jun Xie hadn't expected to get away with his actions so easily, especially since he knew that the second prince had shown interest in Lady Yuer. As for his action, Jun Xie felt no guilt about the manner in which he had treated Lady Yuer. She might be a woman, but she's still an enemy, and there's nothing that I wouldn't do to intercept an enemy. Since she planned and plotted against the Jun family and me, why should I show any restraint against her? The young Master Jun's conscience was clear in that regard. Lady Yuer's entire body trembled with rage as her tear-stained eyes looked at Jun Xie's swaying palanquin. She turned around and raised her gaze to look wildly at the prince in complaint. But instead of voicing her complaint, she turned around and left. The second prince stood dazed in his spot, but his face was expressing the disgust his heart felt. Who would have thought that the second prince's attempt to entertain Jun Xie would yield such a result? Who could have guessed that the young Master Jun would act so arrogantly, and would even ignore the second prince's objections? Jun Xie had paid no heed to the prince's objections and had even left without apologizing for his actions, which was tantamount to slapping the prince's dignity in the face. The second prince had never been so embarrassed in his entire life. It could be said that he hated Jun Xie right down to his core. He stood there motionless for a long time, away from the other men in his company. The prince was barely able to stop himself from breaking into tears. The prince stood dazed for a long time. He eventually raised his gaze, sighed and said, "Let's go." Chengde Chao decided to fawn and make his gains. "Your Highness? This Jun Xie was so rude to Your Highness today. Allow me to teach him a lesson. I could even have his life." "Are you really that stupid?" The prince looked at the man in front of his eyes and said, "He might have been arrogant, and may even have insulted me today, but I cannot retaliate, and that is a fact. Do you think that Jun Xie would have had the courage to contradict me if he didn't know this? And you want me to break my relationship with him? Teach him a lesson? Assassinate him? Is your head really full of so much rubbish? First, you do not have the power to do anything to Jun Xie. And secondly, if anything untoward happened to Jun Xie right now, then we'll be the first ones coming under suspicion. Jun Zhantian's anger has caused bloodbaths in the city before as well. Will you only be happy after he runs a bloody riot inside my palace? Well, don't you think I've had enough for one day?" The flatterer had been kicked in the face. Cheng De Chao's face twitched in anger a few times, but he remained silent. Although he continued to curse inside his heart, "What kind of a prince are you? First you allow the grandson of your military general to humiliate you, and then you take it out on me? That's for certain when it comes to Jun Zhantian." Fang Bowen stroked his beard and slowly stated, Jun Moxie's actions were clearly intentional, meaning that he had already come prepared to cause a scene today. "Well? What makes you say that?" the second prince thoughtfully asked. "The Jun family has always refused to participate in the politics of the empire, and has only concentrated their attention on military matters. All three of His Majesty's sons were trying to involve the Jun family in the empire's politics, so it's only natural that they would want to remove themselves from being involved. Jun Zhantian's army has already proven that they can cause a bloodbath in ministerial mansions before. The Jun family has already shown their power before. And whichever son of the Majesty manages to get a grasp on this force will have enough power to overrule the other two. In other words, the prince who gains their support will rule the empire. Now we have seen their attitude, and the other two will also come to know about this soon. So now, I'm afraid that High Royal Highness and his brothers will have no other option but to leave the Jun family and Jun Zhantian out of the political agendas, since the man doesn't wish to get involved. Even if the Jun family is willing to expose their true strength, they still wouldn't be willing to join into the muddy waters of political conspiracies. In this case, the best way to retain their support is to leave them out of the politics. And that's the only way. The second prince was gradually beginning to understand, so I should break my political relations with them? No. His Royal Highness must break his political connections with his brothers. Only after demonstrating your solidarity against the politics of this empire will you ever be able to securely gain the support of the Jun family. Otherwise, Jun Zhantian will never support you. In other words, it didn't matter which prince's invitation Jun Moxie accepted today. He was going to act in the same way, and would have choreographed a falling out. His Highness, the second prince was just unlucky since Jun Moxie decided to pick you for making his statement. Killing a chicken to scare the monkeys, the second prince was finally beginning to understand, but couldn't help gnash his teeth in rage. Jun Moxie, that son of a b*tch. He actually made me, the second prince, his chicken. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 133. The Legendary Jinx. After the scene that the young Master Jun has caused here, the other princes won't dare to bother him, and the Jun family will be able to carry on peacefully. It seems that this whole plan was orchestrated by Jun Zhantian. But this situation has also given rise to an additional problem. A big problem. Fang Bowen frowned his eyebrows. Please explain, teacher. The second prince's face was already beginning to look gloomier, and it seemed as if he had already made his own guess. Your Highness said it yourself. Fang Bowen sighed loudly. Soon, everyone will know that Your Highness and Jun Moxie have had a falling out in public, and that Your Highness was publicly humiliated by the young Master Jun's arrogance. If any harm comes to the young Master Jun at this time, then Your Highness will undoubtedly be the first one to be suspected for it. I firmly believe that Your Highness's enemies won't miss this chance to frame you. What is this nonsense? The second prince was suddenly furious. Even after all the humiliation that I have faced today, I will still have to protect him. It all depends on Your Highness's choice. If Your Highness isn't afraid of Jun Zhantian's wrath, then you can simply ignore this possibility. Fang Bowen stated slowly. The second prince remained silent. Not afraid? That's an understatement. So many men lost their lives the other day. The last time Jun Xie lost his temper, he cleared out almost a third of the imperial court. If he lost his temper on me, I can't give him a reason to ransack my palace. D*mn that son of a B*tch, the second prince felt wronged to the point of death. This man was turning into a legendary jinx for him. He had been nothing more than pure bad luck for the prince. First he had insulted the second prince. And then Jun Moxie had also insulted Lady Heir, and had also made a public enemy out of her. A delicate silhouette was watching the second prince from the top of the Nichang pavilion as the second prince continued to walk alongside the road. If that's the case, then you should have thought twice before arranging this meeting. Jun Moxie humiliated me publicly today, and you didn't even try to stop him. If I'm so bad for your reputation, then why did you try to pursue me to start with? I'm Heir. How could you let this happen to me? A sly silver light flashed in her eyes as Lady Heir bit her lips. If you won't do anything since you are afraid of Jun Xi's military might, then I'll take this matter into my own hands. I will not allow Jun Moxie to get away with this. He will die without a proper burial. As the night gradually became darker, Lady Heir loosened her hand and released a pigeon. The pigeon fluttered its wings a few times, and then flew up into the air. Around a distant dark corner, a dark-clothed figure started to run at the speed of lightning and quickly landed on a nearby rooftop. The man released a dark-colored net and spread it open in midair, and the dark-colored net gradually fused into the dark sky. The pigeon which had just taken off from the Nichang pavilion landed inside the net. The black-clothed man collected the body of the pigeon and quickly retreated into the shadows. The second prince's platoon reached his residence late night. Another black pigeon was released into the night sky, which quickly disappeared as well. Chengda Chao stood by the window with a grin on his face, and murmured, Jun Moxie, I don't care about the power of your family. Since you've insulted me today, I will not allow you to exist. Everyone will think that you were killed by one of the princes, who will suspect me. What's more, I don't even have the strength to harm you, right? Ha ha ha. This self-proclaimed genius was a complete fool to take out a deal against the hitman Jun Moxie. Jun Moxie hadn't missed out on any details so far, and had already placed his sleuths around the second prince's residence as well. Everything was working according to Jun Moxie's plan so far. Jun Moxie was looking a little depressed sitting inside his rickety palanquin. He was so accustomed to traveling on his own feet that sitting inside his palanquin was nothing short of torture for him. These kinds of things aren't good for hitmen. So much bouncing and swaying can make anyone's life miserable. Why would some people consider traveling in these palanquins a status symbol? If I had any kind of a heart-based condition, then so much swaying would have already sent me straight to the gates of hell. Even though Jun Moxie was trying his best to fight the urge to get out of the palanquin until he reached the Jun residence, the extraordinarily slow speed and the constant swaying of his ride was more than he could tolerate. Unable to bear it anymore, the young Master Jun was almost about to open his mouth and order his bearers to halt, when he suddenly heard a whoosh sound, and some kind of a small white object jumped into his palanquin, cried excitedly, "Ho!" and rubbed its body against Jun Moxie's arms. Jun Moxie reacted quickly, and grabbed the unknown animal by its neck, and picked it up. As he looked at the small animal, he realized that he was holding Du Xiao Yi's high-end Xian beast, the iron-winged panther cub. Jun Moxie carefully looked at the small limbs of the tiny creature in a weird way. How could something so small be so fast? And how fast will he become after he grows up into an adult? I underestimated this animal. He is truly worthy of being called a high-end Xian beast. The panther cub was unable to move since it was suspended mid-air from its neck furs, and hence it opened its mouth to whine, while its limbs drooped helplessly. His beautiful pair of eyes were looking at Jun Xie with a confused look in them, unable to understand why a man he liked so much would treat him in such a crude manner. Jun Xie immediately assessed that debauchee must be somewhere in the vicinity. How else would this young Xian beast be able to smell his scent? He extended his finger and poked the tiny creature's miniature nose, and ferociously whispered, "Please, you mustn't follow me. If you continue to follow me, then your owner will create a lot of trouble for me since her entire family will come after me. Do you know how much trouble I will be in then? You please stop this. Please." His initial intention was to frighten the animal away, but he had no idea why he had ended up begging piteously instead. Even though the iron winger panther was a high-end Xian beast, he was still accustomed to being around humans. But he still wasn't able to interpret the meaning of Jun Xie's words, and strained its neck as he looked at Jun Xie with an even more puzzled look in his eyes now. Jun Xie released the tiny cub, who suddenly hummed twice, and looked at Jun Xie with a merry look in his eyes. Unexpectedly, the small cub jumped up and landed straight into Jun Xie's arms. He took 2 deep breaths, and arched its tiny neck a few times until it found a comfortable spot to rest its head on Jun Xie's chest. Then, he opened its rosy pink mouth, yawned, and its beautiful eyes slowly started to narrow as he slowly fell asleep. Well, he can't be blamed for this. I'm a big man with a big chest, and big chests are usually quite comfortable to sleep on. But I'm in so much trouble now. Little White. Where are you, Little White? Little White. He heard a crisp sound, and he could tell that the source was anxious enough to break into tears at any point. Debauchee had been treating this young cub as her baby, and since the young Xian beast had suddenly disappeared now, her mind was obviously in a state of complete chaos. Jun Xie sighed at his fate. Even if this seemed like a tale of fate from some folklore, it was more like ill-fated attraction in his eyes. A cold voice echoed in front of the palanquin, "I request the people inside to kindly step out." This cold and dull voice belonged to Yi Guhan. He was a Sky Xian expert, so he had obviously been able to spot the cub as it jumped into Jun Xie's palanquin after jumping out of Debauchee's arms. Although the beast was very small in size, the Sky Xian expert was sure that it was inside the palanquin. After a while, Jun Xie's voice lazily sounded from within the palanquin, "Really? There are so many people inside the Tianxiang city, but this young master is just destined to constantly bump into you?" Both the people suddenly spoke up in unison after they heard his voice, Jun Xie. Although they spoke up at the same time, but they did so to express completely different emotions. While Yi Guhan's voice was filled with contempt and anger, Debauchee's sound was filled with a sense of joy. Formerly, Debauchee had excitedly followed Princess Ling Meng to the imperial palace, and had stayed there for several days without going back to the Dugu family's residence. But if the eldest daughter of the house remains away from the family for such a long time without any notice, then the family is bound to get worried. And so Debauchee bid Princess Ling Meng farewell, and departed for her family's house. Even though the princess wished to retain her at the palace with pure intention in her heart, she was intelligent enough to understand that it might be wrong to. The princess was quite angered to know that the young Master Jun was also in the vicinity at the time when Debauchee was supposed to leave for her residence. Unable to stop the eldest daughter of the Dugu family from leaving, she had asked Yi Guhan to escort her back to her residence as a precaution against anyone with evil intentions. Who would have known that Debauchee's little Xian beast would suddenly catch the familiar smell of a man he was fond of, and would dart out of her arms, and would land inside a palanquin without leaving a single trace behind it, leaving his owner anxious and worried to the point of dying. Hearing Jun Moxie's voice from inside the palanquin clearly explained the situation to her. No wonder Little White reacted like this. I remember. He really liked Jun Moxie the last he met the man, so it's not very surprising that he chased after the young Master Jun. Jun Moxie helplessly jumped out of his palanquin with the Xian beast cub in his arms. Debauchee saw his face and was left speechless instead of cheerfully greeting him. Watching her Little White peacefully resting in his arms, and unwilling to even open its eyes to see its master's face, made her feel a bit envious since it clearly indicated that the young creature was feeling very peaceful and comfortable, almost as if he was in the most comfortable place on the planet. But watching Jun Moxie's tired face aroused a sense of sadness in her heart. These feelings were quite strange and new for the eldest daughter of the Dugu family, and she remained silent for a long time, unable to react to the situation, which was a very rare thing given her character. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 134. A Young Maiden's Heart. Oh. Hee. We're in the same place again, Miss Dugu. I guess we were destined to meet each other again. Jun Moxie smiled as he said the words, while his face was carrying a pleasantly surprised look. The young Master Jun hadn't never expected that even though he had greeted Dugu Xiaoyi in the same manner as always, these words were now being interpreted by her in a very different context. He said destined. And I'm very fortunate that I met you. Hey. This really could be destiny. Would we be able to see each other daily? Would our families oppose this? Jun Moxie's words had filled her heart with joy, and her initial resentment had already gone up in smoke, thanks to Little White's mischief. Otherwise I wouldn't have been able to see you today. Dugu Xiaoyi wasn't involved in political conspiracies that clogged the dark side of the world. Even though she was the same age as Jun Moxie, she behaved like a normal 16-year-old girl. Given her age and background, she couldn't understand the complexly subtle emotions like love, etc. She had often heard of Jun Moxie's unbearable arrogance in the past, and had always felt disgusted by it. She had always felt that the man needed to be disciplined, very strictly. But after her previous few encounters with the young Master Jun, she had realized that the so-called hedonistic and flippant son of rich parents was actually a very organized and of very appropriate character, due to which she had started seeing Jun Moxie in a very general light. But these encounters aroused a lot of curiosity in Dugu Xiaoyi's heart. Jun Moxie is a tiger in a pig's shell, and he pretends to be such in order to deal with the outside world. Until this time, she had always felt disgusted in his presence, and had always looked down upon him. But she had finally started to realize something at this point. I've been misunderstanding Jun Moxie all this time. Even though Dugu Xiaoyi's attitude towards Jun Moxie was beginning to change, she still couldn't help thinking, I have misunderstood Jun Moxie for several years, and I've bullied him for so many years without giving him any reason to explain his actions. He suffered it all these years without making any complaints, which was justifiable for a man with low intelligence. But it's obvious that he's very clever. Could I be misunderstanding him again? Such thoughts had ignited mixed feelings in her heart, since she also knew that Jun Moxie had tricked her into defrauding the metallic ore from her hands, which had left her feeling very displeased. But then again, maybe he did that because that metallic ore was very important for him. Is his resourcefulness his true face? Why is it so difficult to see the real face of people? Why do we have to deliberately hide ourselves from the world outside? Even with these thoughts in the back of her mind, she still saw him as a bully for cheating the metallic ore away from her. but realized that she had missed it out at the time since she was too proud and arrogant, and couldn't see that he was a tiger disguised as a pig, which made her a bit upset. Then thinking again, I've known him so many years, and I've bullied him so much in past, but he had never seemingly bothered about it. As these thoughts sprouted in her head, she suddenly felt as if something was amiss. She cried after she returned home that day. She wept since she was beginning to recall their encounters over these past years. She recalled all the suffering that the Jun family had been through, and began imagining that it must have been very hard on Jun Moxie, which instilled an indistinct sense of pain in her heart. On top of that, she had made her father bully Jun Moxie several times in the past since she had felt that he had wronged her, owing to which she had wished to get even with him. After she started to understand the unsaid aspects of Jun Moxie's life, she felt as if someone had struck her heart with a hammer. So many years of misunderstanding him. Will I ever be able to compensate for it? As these thoughts came into her head, she had started to blame herself. Once a young heart develops such feelings, they often find it difficult to conceal their emotions. Naturally, she had been unable to eat her meals properly for days. After pondering over these issues for several days, the young Master Jun's reputation started to change very drastically in her psyche, and in due course of time, she started seeing in a very high light. For this reason, she ventured into her grandfather's study one day, with the intention of inquiring more about Jun Moxie, and after learning more about the Jun family situation, she finally found an explanation for his behavior. The previously declining Jun family has now once again become very dangerous and powerful. He has managed to turn his family's fortunes around at the cost of creating a very dirty public reputation for himself, and after suffering so much humiliation. His life has been so difficult. Even though he's just my age, he has suffered so much for so many years. No wonder there is such a great contrast between him and the others. This man is instilled with a sense of responsibility and is willing to make sacrifices for his family. Jun Moxie had actually tried to save the princess, which had almost injured him to the point of death, such a chivalrous man. So Jun Moxie had suddenly gone from a debauchee to a responsible and noble young man in Dugu Xiaoyi's mind. This had completely twisted her life upside down. Once a young girl develops a favorable impression about a man, anything the man does seems justifiable and noble to the young woman. After she found out that the young Master Jun had been seriously injured while saving the princess, she started to fear for his well-being and even started to fantasize about helping him in his rehabilitation. Then later, when she suddenly heard Jun Moxie's voice in the magnificent jewel hall, her heart soared with an unexplainable sense of joy, and she felt as if she had just recovered a long-lost treasure. Then her pet suddenly took a liking to Jun Moxie, which made the young maiden even more happy since Little White had never shown any affection to anyone apart from her. She started seeing this as an indication of something special in Jun Moxie. At that time, she was still unable to understand whether Jun Moxie was an evil man or a good one. But then, as an after effect of the trouble that her father and brothers sprouted at the Jun residence, she started asking herself, so I really fancy bad men? Do I really like him? What is this feeling? This feeling is really, really wonderful. In the following days, even though she was afraid since her father and brothers started interfering in these matters, her heart still carried a sense of apprehension. Even though she didn't meet him again for a long while, just the thought of him was enough to make her a little shy, and she started thinking that she fancied him. With these thoughts in her mind, her heart leapt and her face would blush since she would long for their next encounter. The mind of a young maiden can be very elusive, almost like a poetic dream, full of endless fantasies. Although Dugu Xiaoyi was a highborn, she wasn't as arrogant and haughty as some of the other powerful women of the kingdom. Her heart was that of a delicate young maiden's, and wasn't very different from that of an ordinary farmer's daughter. All the interventions and pressure that followed in the succeeding days abruptly forced out these feelings and made them stronger. If it hadn't been for the wild speculations of Princess Ling Meng, if it hadn't been for the naughty interventions of the Dugu family, then these emotions would have gradually diluted. Then, Jun Xie would have only remained a very interesting character in her life, an interesting man and a very reliable person. That's all. Believing that he is just another very interesting man, with passing age and increasing distance, he would have become a transient passerby in her life, who she'd only recall as a faint memory in time to come. But due to the blend of circumstances, Dugu Xiaoyi suddenly started gripping harder to the thought that Jun Xie was a rare exception, and started becoming so convinced about it, that she slowly built a cocoon around herself. At the moment when she heard his voice today, her heart suddenly started pounding so hard that it almost skipped a few beats, and she didn't know how to react since she didn't know how he felt about her. Her face had suddenly started burning and she had even contemplated the idea of running away. Him, really? Destined to be together? Oops, people will think shameful things. Dugu Xiaoyi's good-looking face was suddenly red. Thief Jun. This night has been a real eye-opener for me. Don't even think of doing anything to Miss Dugu. Yi Gu Han looked at him coldly. I don't know what means Jun Xie used in order to attract Miss Dugu's high-level Xian beast cub towards himself, but it's undeniable that he only did so to trouble Miss Dugu Xiaoyi. Dugu Xiaoyi's pet's affection for this man is quite obvious, and now that the cub is so attached to Jun Xie, it will undoubtedly make things very uncomfortable for her. In fact, it might even put her in harm's way in the future since her pet might seek him again, which is a very dangerous thing. In addition to their masters, high-end Xian beasts rarely ever develop any kind of attraction toward strangers. Although Yi Gu Han couldn't explain this mystery, and even felt that it was quite incredible, but he was still convinced that the young master Jun must have used some very shameful methods to attract the young cub. What other explanation could there be for this? What? Thief? Don't call me a thief. Jun Xie was somewhat depressed. Did I bother anyone? Why would he act so blindly and be so hostile towards me? This isn't fair. I simply didn't do anything. This animal simply jumped into my palanquin and slept off in my arms. I'm a handsome and suave guy. That's a rare thing. Makes me stand apart. I'm the real victim here. This isn't fair. Thief Jun. Are you refusing to hand over Little White to Miss Dugu? Yi Gu Han was feeling very fortunate that he was escorting the young miss personally. Otherwise it would have been hard for her to escape Jun Xie's trap. And if anything untoward happened to the young Miss Dugu, then it would have sprouted a big dispute in the capital. As far as he was concerned, he absolutely needed to stop this thief's conspiracies. Yi Gu Han. Right? Why would you be so narrow-minded? Anyway, you are the princess's guard. Why would you even intervene in this matter? Who do you think you are? This matter is between me and the young Mississippi. Why are you sticking your foot into it? Jun Xie returned Little White to Dugu Xiaoyi, as he replied to Yi Gu Han, feeling wronged by the man's accusations. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 135. Surprise. The hitman's nature somewhat resembled that of a donkey. If you stroke it gently, then you'd feel the softness of its hair. But if you're blindly harsh, then Jun Xie would react even more harshly. This, perhaps, was the greatest weakness of his character. Although Yi Gu Han was the one who was making the accusations at Jun Xie, he completely ignored the man, making his face blue with anger, and helplessly glimpsed at Dugu Xiao Yi. Miss Dugu, do you also believe that I abducted Little White? I haven't done any such thing. I never abducted him, he jumped into my palanquin on his own. Even the last time I met him, Little White showed a fondness towards me. And why would I ever try to steal him? For making a pot stew out of him? But he's so small. He won't even give out much meat either. Little White was comfortably lying in his arms, while his throat ceaselessly emitted a comfortable purr sound, a voice which an animal only emits when it's at its happiest. He opened his eyes and satisfactorily looked at Jun Moxie's body with warm and comfortable look in his eyes, and then closed them again. Little did the intoxicated cub know that the man he was so taken by was just talking about using his body for pot stew. What did you just say? Dugu Xiao Yi opened her eyes wide. She clenched her tiny hands into a fist as she angrily looked at Jun Moxie, and it seemed as if she wished to spank him. Well, miss, you never stop teasing me. Your father and 7 brothers showed up at the Jun residence the other day and leveled the buildings to the ground. Some of the rooms don't even have a roof over their heads anymore. Jun Moxie arched his hand as he described the state of the infrastructure, while leaning against his palanquin, making his body look weirdly boneless. The mournful look on his face suggested that he felt wronged by the ravaging that the members of the Dugu family had caused to his home. Dugu Xiao Yi didn't like the look on his face, and started thinking about her 7 brothers. Oh. I know the facts. And I don't blame you. Sorry. I'm sorry. Once I get back home, I'll ask my father to help you build back your house. And I'll make sure that your family is compensated for the losses incurred. Dugu Xiao Yi was feeling a special kind of embarrassment at the moment. After all, she was carrying the impression that Jun Moxie had been harassed by her family on her account. The poor girl was under the impression that her family had caused a lot of trouble for Jun Moxie, and was already beginning to imagine the destruction that her father and her 7 brutal brothers must have caused to the Jun residence. As far as she was concerned, even if Jun Moxie was exaggerating things a bit, their actions still must have been very difficult on Jun Moxie. But she didn't know that Jun Moxie had grounded her 7 brothers, who still hadn't been able to get up from their beds. And even though her father fared slightly better, Jun Moxie had blatantly blackmailed the man into expending huge sums of money. Never mind. These matters are not to concern you since your father was probably misinformed. Jun Moxie generously waved his hand. I'm from the younger generation, so I must practice tolerance and forbearance, even if I'm wronged by my elders. Anyway, our families have been friends for a long time, and have many deep sentiments attached to each other, so there is really no need to point swords and spears at each other over such trivial matters. Dugu Xiao Yi nodded in approval as her beautiful eyes lit up with a look of satisfaction. The fact that you're not taking into account my emotions. Sometimes things just happen. There's no need to beat. She stammered as she uttered these few words slowly, and was unable to finish her sentence since her face had turned completely red, right down to her neck. The poor young maiden had completely misunderstood his meaning, and had instinctively believed that Jun Moxie had been forced to bear the abuse of his father and brothers. Since she was blaming herself for it, the young maiden's heart suddenly turned as sweet as honey, and her thoughts started to stray once more. Jun Moxie stated once again in a gentlemanly manner, "True. That's the way it must be." Dugu Xiao Yi became even shyer, and started unconsciously drawing rings in the ground with her toe, while her neck and head had turned red with a blush. Her eyes were secretly watching Jun Moxie's face. Filling her heart was a sense of infinite satisfaction. Yi Gu Han was a hard-skinned man and was unable to watch these people court each other with the affection of young lovers. Jun Moxie. How can you be so shameless? Yi Guhan pointed his finger at Jun Moxie, and it seemed as if he wished to kill the youngster. The 7 sons of the Dugu family suffered such a great calamity at your hands. And yet you say such things? Ah! How could that be? Dugu Xiao Yi cried out in shock, unable to believe that Jun Moxie could harm her brothers. That's not the truth. Jun Moxie flatly denied the truth in order to avoid trouble. Yi Guhan, you're a dignified Sky Xian expert. Please do not give heed to such fabricated rumors. How could I suddenly hurt 7 people? Could I have ever beaten them up? Don't you know about my abilities? And you still think that I could cope up with the 7 of them? Please don't try to bend the facts. The situation was reaching a critical juncture, and he simply couldn't admit his actions. If he admitted to hurting her brothers, then she was likely to flip out at him. Dugu Xiao Yi looked at Yi Guhan with a puzzled look on her face. Miss Dugu, you must go home and see for yourself. Yi Guhan was unmoved, and continued to look at Jun Moxie coldly. Miss Dugu, the color of the night deepens, and we must be on our way. I have to return to the princess's side for her protection. Dugu Xiao Yi couldn't make up her mind. She hesitantly looked at Jun Moxie again, and analyzed that the atmosphere wasn't very favorable at the moment. Even though she was a bit reluctant to leave, she knew that Yi Guhan's words made sense, and she would only understand the truth after reaching her residence. On top of that, she was well aware that Yi Guhan was a man of his words, and wouldn't lie to her in such a manner. Although, given his skill, she simply couldn't fathom how Jun Moxie could hurt the 7 of her brothers. Little White, come to me. I will take you home. Dugu Xiao Yi clapped her hands as she approached closer to Jun Moxie. She tasted a faint smell of his body's aroma in the air, and couldn't help blush even more. Jun Moxie hastily returned Little White to her arms. The little panther cub didn't resist, but looked at Jun Moxie helplessly with a pitiful look in his eyes. A question suddenly emerged inside Jun Moxie's mind. Why is Little White showing so much attachment towards me? This simply doesn't make any sense. Nothing ever happens in this world without a reason, so there must be something about me that other people don't have, and something that I haven't thought of yet. Is it because the Hongjun Pagoda and the art of unlocking the heavens' fortune? Being the only possible explanation, this idea swept across Jun Moxie's conscience like a tsunami. Jun Moxie, could we meet tomorrow? Dugu Xiao Yi lowered her head in search for a reason, and found one lying in her arms. Little White really likes you. Oh, you can see it too, he really likes you. I do not wish to make him unhappy. Even though Dugu Xiao Yi had found an excuse to meet him again, she didn't know how to use it properly, and was wondering if it was a good measure to use Little White as an excuse to arrange a meeting with him. Sure. Jun Moxie responded in acceptance. I can help you in looking after Little White tomorrow. I'll see you tomorrow for some playtime, Little White. Dugu Xiao Yi's heart rejoiced as she stated, it's a deal. It's a deal. Jun Moxie maliciously looked at the little cub as he exposed a pleasant smile. Come back tomorrow so I can carry out some experiments on you. The little cub, which was now in Dugu Xiao Yi's arms, suddenly felt a burst of chill on his body, and his soft and delicate white furs stood upright. Alerted, he looked around in search of an enemy, but couldn't spot any. If he was capable of speaking, he would have surely voiced his skepticism. Why is this happening? Why did I suddenly feel these creeps? Why does it feel as if someone stripped me? Why are my fur upright for no reason? Dugu Xiao Yi retreated 3 steps and left. Jun Moxie had already accomplished his objective, and so he quickly returned to the Jun residence. Third uncle. Third uncle. Just as Jun Moxie returned, he sensed a different smell in the atmosphere, and quickly ran into the courtyard. What's going on? Jun Xie slowly came out. In the absence of outsiders, he wouldn't be sitting in his wheelchair since he had been in it for over a decade, and was already quite bored of it. Jun Xie replied with a solemn look in his eyes, I brought those kids back. Kids? Which one? What children? Jun Moxie stuttered. Out of the children whom we previously set free, I've ordered 45 of them to be set up in the warehouse for a bit, as a temporary accommodation. As for the ones with deformities, all 39 of them have been presently accommodated here. I'm trying to use my Xian Qi to see if I can unblock their tendons in order to see if there's any hope for them to have a normal life. Jun Moxie was completely surprised. Jun Xie looked at him profoundly. Moxie, you did something with a strong purpose, but it comes with some heavy responsibilities as well. It is important for us to cultivate the strength of our family, but it would be harsh, even cruel, of us to not act on this matter. You may blame me for this, but as long as I'm the head of the Jun family, we have an obligation to be responsible for the basic necessities of these children, which includes curing their injuries and illnesses. Moreover, although charity mustn't be done recklessly, the downtrodden mustn't be neglected outrightly. Jun Xie's eyes were filled with a sense of pain, like these children, no matter what. He expressed these words very resolutely and decisively, and it was obvious that there would be no challenging his decision. Since he had personally suffered from a disability for a long time, it was apparent that he was looking at these children with a strong sense of sympathy. Even if they can't do anything by themselves, we will support them. It doesn't matter how much burden they impose on us. Jun Moxie remained speechless for a long time before he finally replied, I understand. He inwardly thought to himself, perhaps this is the difference between men of honor and ordinary men. However, does such kindness really make sense? Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 136. It's difficult to do good. Jun Moxie was a born killer. He had always been calm, cold-blooded, and had barely ever shown any affection towards anyone. Even in his previous life, he had only cared for his master and a handful of his mates. As for his present life, he was only concerned with the well-being of his grandfather and his uncle. In fact, even Guan Qinghan, his sister-in-law, didn't receive this kind of concern from the hitman, so there's no point in talking about others. Jun Moxie would often show compassion towards people in distress, but when it came to actually caring for them, he'd politely decline. Of course, kindness also has its limitations and drawbacks. If I was left standing on one leg someday, then these people will probably be the first ones to abandon me. But if we have the ability, we must bear in mind that a man doesn't need a reason to save another. Even though Jun Xie was bearing his emotions undisguised, Jun Moxie wasn't exactly being influenced by them. But still, he agreed with his uncle's statement, a man doesn't need a reason to save another. The ability to do good deeds isn't the natural temperament of a cold-blooded heart. However, doing good deeds is a hard task, and one must make sure that they only help people who are willing to help themselves. Otherwise, both men are consigned to eternal nation together. Jun Moxie obviously understood this truth far better than his uncle. Anyway, why did you come looking for me in such a hurry? Jun Xie asked. Well, I need some Xian beasts. Low level and high level. Preferably at least one beast of each level, as high as level 8 if possible. Jun Moxie smiled slyly. High-level Xian beasts. You must be dreaming. So wake up, Moxie. Jun Moxie looked at his nephew with a funny look in his eyes. And did you just say level 8 Xian beast? Arranging lower-level Xian beasts might be possible. Level 4 or under. But once you start talking about level 5. Level 6. Even if we were lucky enough to find any, they'd certainly be riddled with disabilities. Or loss of functions. As for level 7 or above, you're literally dreaming. Only low levels? That's also okay. I can make do with them alone. By the way, even if you can find crippled level 5 or level 6 Xian beasts, get them. As long as they are alive. Please send them to me. Jun Moxie looked quite serious. I require them by tomorrow morning. Understood. I'll arrange them. Jun Moxie didn't show the slightest signs of hesitation. So much so that he didn't even ask Jun Moxie's purposes. He was too concerned with the expenditure of this venture of his nephew's. Level 5 or 6 Xian beasts were immensely expensive, even the crippled ones. Thank you very much, uncle. Jun Moxie was very serious. Well, now that you're back, help me in taking a look at the children that we've managed to bring in. I've been busy in evaluating their situation for a long while now, and I could use a second opinion. Jun Wuyi's face looked a bit tired. Sure, third uncle. I'll take a look. Jun Moxie stepped inside the room. The 39 children in the room had obviously been washed more than once by now, and had already been provided with beds and snow-white beddings, but even that wasn't enough to hide their stench. Apparently, some dirt had already infiltrated their skin, and had embedded itself deep into their bones. Cleansing their bodies over such a short period of time was obviously not possible. Each of these children was thin as a match. These 39 children had only one thing in common. Their limbs were deformed, while their tongues were amputated. In fact, more than 20 of them had been stabbed in their ears, which meant that they were actually deaf and dumb at the same time. Jun Moxie sighed as his blood boiled with rage. The heavens cannot tolerate such acts. Once I find you, I will make you pay 100 times over. These children had already eaten a meal, so their facial color was looking a lot better. They looked a lot livelier now. The moment Jun Moxie came in, they immediately realized that he was the man who had saved them, and although they were incapable of saying it, they expressed their gratitude with their eyes. For the first time ever, whether in this life or the one before, Jun Moxie exposed a lukewarm smile to appease those poor children, and approached the one closest to him for inspection. His speed of inspection was obviously a lot faster than that of his uncle. Jun Moxie finished his inspection after a while, stood up with a heavy face, and winked at his uncle to make a gesture, and the two men stepped outside. Some of the smaller ones are hopeless. Jun Moxie gritted his teeth. The bones of 3 of them have rotten to such an extent that their entire lower body, including their waist bones, have completely rusted. Their death is just a matter of time now. Even a miracle drug won't be able to save them. Even though they are still breathing, they are practically struggling on whilst at the door of death. However, with unconditional support, they might be able to carry on for about 2 more weeks. But these 2 weeks will be very painful and nothing more than pure torture. Jun Wuyi clenched his fists tightly. There are several others whose hands and feet have reached the point of necrosis, and their meridians have been completely degraded. They will probably never recover, and will have to lead an abnormal life. Jun Moxie lowered his voice. Then there are 12 others. If we cut off their limbs and parts below their waist, then they might be able to live on. But such a life, they will just be alive, not even men or women, just alive. Jun Xie held his breath as wave of cold air washed over his face. As for the rest, their condition is much better. Maybe they weren't subjected to those jars for long. Or maybe there was some other reason. But their deformities aren't as serious. As long as their bodies are nursed properly, their hands and feet could be broken once, and then grown again with the help of careful medical treatment. In fact, this regrowth could be accelerated with the help of proper medication. Later, we could break off their limbs again, and then we could use Xian Qi to cleanse and reopen their meridians. After regrowing their limbs the second time, they might be able to recover to a very good extent. However, conducting this treatment for even a single person would cost several million taels of silver, and even that won't ensure the success of the treatment. In fact, my biggest concern and our biggest hurdle will be breaking their bones twice. We won't simply be breaking their bones. We'll also have to ensure that their meridians don't get affected. And we'll need to ensure that their meridians continue to flow uninterrupted. Such treatments are extremely painful. And Jun Moxie's eyes deepened. Ordinary people cannot bear so much pain. And even after such a painful medical procedure, their best and most optimistic chance is to be capable of achieving 60% of a normal human's functionality. Jun Xie gasped. Jun Xie had already experienced the medical expertise of his nephew firsthand, and trusted his judgment completely. So basically, even if he was fortunately enough, and was able to save some of these people, even then they wouldn't be able to lead a normal life, and would still live a life of relative torture and misery. If third uncle must save them, then I will advise that you be prepared to spend millions of taels of silver in advance by the most conservative estimate. And I'm not even taking into account the cost of the medication post their treatment yet. Even after a successful treatment, the body of the patient will be at its lowest possible functionality, and the physical conditioning of the patient will require expensive drugs, which will be very essential in restoring their physical abilities, and will need to provide them with all this throughout their medical treatment. In other words, just the cost of the post-medical treatment is expected to cost 50,000 taels per head, which is considered an astronomical amount in most other families. Uncle, I hope you don't take my words to heart. I know that our Jun family has a very deep and rich patrimony, but you have to recognize the problem here, as the head of the house. Once you tread on this path, and continue to destroy the other dens of sin alongside, you will receive many such children. Do you think we will be able to save them all? If you wish to provide salvation to all such children, then I believe that you will need the support of more than just the Jun family. In fact, even the entire Tianxiang kingdom will not have enough power to bear the burden of such an immense financial expenditure. If third uncle insists on bearing this responsibility till the end, then there will only be one end result: the Jun family will eventually be destroyed along with such children. I do not oppose the third uncle's benevolence to do good deeds, but in this matter, you must stop here. You cannot initiate this instance. As Jun Xie listened to Jun Moxie's calm and cold-blooded analysis, his face started becoming more and more serious, and a fresh wave of depression started to wash over his soul. It's difficult to do good. Jun Moxie sighed deeply. If a family as influential as the Jun family took the initiative for a charitable cause such as this one in the previous world, and called upon the community to set up a fund, they could have easily established orphanages or similar such places for the support of such children, and would have been able to provide them a good life regardless of their physical condition. But was such a feat possible in the feudal monarchy of this world? The answer was undoubtedly no. Even if there was no issue of money involved, failure to carry out such a campaign successfully would be very embarrassing for a family of the Jun family's caliber, And in case the Jun family was able to succeed alone in their venture, then they would gain the support of the public masses, which would only agitate the royal family. Under such a feudal system, even doing excessive good deeds could lead to a complete disaster. Just as you say, I will not take this initiative very far. Tomorrow I'll make arrangements for the children in the warehouse to be sent over to the manor. As for these people, Jun Xie had already bitten the bullet. I cannot stop halfway now. I cannot allow them to return empty-handed after bringing them to the Jun family's home. But it's just this once. Well, that's the third uncle's decision. But there are about 15 or so children who are a lost cause at this point. Uncle must immediately make arrangements to make their life happier as long as they are alive. And when the moment comes, Uncle must relieve them of their pain. They will not be able to kill themselves. And even though it seems very cruel, but for them, death will be no short of freedom. But Uncle, please remember your words. Just this once. Jun Xie nodded sadly. In addition to arranging for their treatment, you must leave 2 personnel with them, who must be willing to relieve them of their suffering when the moment comes. Uncle, you mustn't be soft-hearted in this regard. Jun Moxie continued, third uncle. I would like to ask if this will cause any problems with respect to the financial condition of our family? I know I speak out of turn, but no matter the world's setting, no one can develop a family without money. You need to have money, and you need to channel it wisely. A family must make these decisions collectively since a family is a continual system. But once the younger generation is forced to ask such questions to their elders, the situation can be very embarrassing for the latter, since they are facing the concerns of their successors. Please subscribe to this channel so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 137. Open a net and the fishes come running. There haven't been any wars in the recent years, so the income of the Jun household has reduced greatly. The fief only generates a revenue of 2 million a year. There's no other source of revenue. Jun Xie's face reflected mixed emotions as he said the words since he knew that Jun Moxie wouldn't like hearing them, but stated the truth since he didn't have another option. That seems a little too less, right? Jun Moxie stated bluntly, only a mere 2 millions. I'm afraid that such a low sum of money isn't enough to support a family as big as our Jun family. 2 millions a year in revenue might seem very high to normal people, and most would even call it an astronomical sum of money. But in the contrast of a family as big as the Jun family, this sum was too less. Even though the Jun family didn't have too many descendants, but there were still at least thousands of people who worked for the family. Providing clothing, food and salaries to just the household worker itself would reach a very alarming expense. Kindly hand over the financial matters to me, and I'll make some changes around the house for the sake of improvements as well. Jun Moxie started pacing about. His mind was secretly contemplating means to sell his wine to support the Jun family's expenditures. That shouldn't be a problem. I really don't have a choice now. I'll sell it at a reduced price first. But later, when they need the cure, I'll only sell it at a very high price. They won't have an option. They'll either have to buy it or die. The young master Jun thought for a while and said, as for the remaining 24 children, third uncle, you must initiate their preliminary recoveries. But watch carefully as to which of them can be of use later in the future when we need them. Although this wasn't the intended reason for rescuing them. But we can't feed them in vain. So if they have the ability to repay us and they still don't, then what's the point of keeping them in the first place? People also have their own value. If a person doesn't have any value, then they are only as good as a breathing corpse and must be abandoned. Jun Xie nodded his head heavily. as a familiar feeling washed over his being. Unorthodox gambits could also help us out. Jun Xie helplessly shook his head. He knew that even though his nephew had an utterly unorthodox thought process, which was morally differential from the rest of the family, the young man was still extremely practical. Though, Jun Xie still wasn't sure if it was a good thing or bad. The hitman, on the other hand, was secretly lamenting. Uncle is a very noble man, but he isn't yet qualified enough to be the leader of a family as big as the Jun family. Even though being the head of the house isn't a cold-hearted job in its entirety, but sometimes tough decisions are required to be made. Personal compassion and mercy cannot be the basis of every action. The code of conduct must be based on the overall interests of the family. However, these thoughts hadn't crossed Jun Xie's consciousness yet, since he was still stuck in the state of being a war general. Jun Moxie left towards his chambers, but Jun Xie was unable to find any sleep. So, he stationed himself in his wheelchair again, and strolled over to the coffee table, and intentionally poured himself a large cup of wine to keep him company in the cold of the night. Slowly, his mind went back a decade into the past. Jun Xie was already upset at the thought of those children's fate, and then Jun Moxie's words made things even worse for him. It took him a long time to calm down, but the wine still ended up amplifying the feeling of sadness, making him even unhappier, leaving him feeling very dejected once again. My beloved Yao, if you were by my side, then what would you have asked me to do? Help me make a choice, you know. I miss you. I miss you very much. Jun Xie's words were muffled in whispers as he raised his glass once again and drank more wine to drown his sorrows. The cool, distant moonlight continued to shower a faint and brilliant light over his body. He continued to listen to the insects as he stayed awake till late, but even their sounds sounded like sobbing to him. Jun Moxie returned to his courtyard, where two black-clothed people had been waiting for him for a while now. Young master, this carrier pigeon flew out of the Ni Chang pavilion. One of the black-clothed men bent over in courtesy and then handed over a pigeon to Jun Moxie. It's not hurt, is it? Jun Moxie looked at the pigeon and asked. Since the master had already instructed very clearly, then how could I have hurt him? If you set this pigeon free now, then it will still be able to fly high and far, and will even reach its intended destination without much delay. The black-clothed man smiled as he stated confidently. Jun Moxie nodded as he gently lifted the bamboo tube off the pigeon's leg, and retrieved a crumpled ball of paper from inside it. Slay the entire Jun family in 1 month's time. Jun Moxie mustn't live. The illegible handwriting of this single sentence was enough to indicate that the writer must have been in a very excited frame of mind. The note carried a tiny U signature at the end. Haha. This woman is so silly. Why would she do such a thing? Did I even retaliate after she slapped me in the face? Does she really think that getting me killed is a good punishment for calling her a slut? She's got no tolerance at all. Jun Moxie smiled as shook his head disdainfully. The faces of the two other men twitched. That woman would try to kill the young master of the Jun family over such an incident? She's no fool, she a Xian Qi expert in her own right. If this pigeon is sent out, then will you be able to track it? Jun Moxie raised the hand which held the pigeon. I cannot trace it. The black-clothed man's face seemed a bit embarrassed. These pigeons have a tendency of flying high and for long distances. Except for capturing or killing them at the time of their ascent, my strength renders me helpless. Oh, that's also all right. Jun Moxie carefully restored the paper to its original position inside the bamboo tube, while carefully determining that the paper and tube were bundled together in the exact same manner as they had been by Ewer. Well, Set it out again. The black-clothed men took the pigeon and left. Jun Moxie smiled as the cool midnight breeze gently brushed past his cheeks. Open a net and the fishes come running in. Ha ha. That night, however, was bound to be another unusual night for the Tianxiang imperial city. Gold, silver, and yellow lights were constantly flashing throughout the city like fireworks in the night sky, but in the silence of darkness. Countless pairs of eyes were alertly watching the imperial city, while their ears were busy listening to any and all signs of trouble. Whenever two such opposing parties came together, a bloodbath would inevitably follow. But these teams continued to carry on, leaving blood and dead bodies in their path as they continued on their mission. Li family, Meng family, Song family and Mu Rong family had been on the move ever since the Xian core had been stolen from the Tang family. Over the course of this sudden change in environment, the Tang family's reaction had been the most unexpected and the most tolerant one. Instead of sending out their troops to inquire, the Tang family had receded backwards and had put strict restrictions on the activities of their personnel. In the dark of the night, 8 shadows seemingly flew over the high walls of the city and entered into it, and slowly concealed their way through the darkness towards the Li residence. The silence of the northern part of the city was being crushed by the rolling of wheels. A team of people were speeding at full pace as they marched through the city. This group was traveling in luxurious bogies, which were being pulled by large and powerful horses, which were far taller than average horses. Moreover, these horses had 2 weird horns on their foreheads, while the 4 legs were covered with scales. It was obvious that these weren't ordinary horses, and were a special kind of Xian beasts. Each and every carriage of this team was being pulled by 4 of these mysterious Xian beasts, and they were traveling at such a fast pace that even a war horse on a battlefield at full gallop wouldn't be able to match up to the pace of their carriages. The first carriage. Grandpa Lu. This mysterious Xian core rumor may not even be true, but we've still traveled thousands of miles in such a hurry. Don't you think that we're overdoing it a bit? Besides, this city isn't our territory, given the power we are investing in this matter. Don't you think that the 9 elders will question us? The voice and manner of speech of the speaker indicated that the man was quite young, and clearly full of impatience. Feng Wu. Since this matter relates to a Xian core from a peak level 9 Xian beast, we had to be careful. Your experience is still shallow, so you may not be aware of the situation. The 9 elders had previously sent out a communication asking a peak spirit Xian expert to investigate the matter. That by itself is enough to validate the authenticity of the matter. My only fear is that even all of us together may not be able to outdo a peak spirit Xian expert. After, a peak spirit Xian expert is no ordinary thing. A hoarse voice replied. Would anyone in the world go against the Blizzard Silver City? Not to mention that 3 elders are also accompanying the grandfather in this venture. Even a peak spirit Xian will not be able to oust the preparations that we've made to acquire the treasure. The young man's voice seemed too full of arrogance, and it seemed that being born into such a high family greatly affected his judgment. Boy, do not blame me for calling you a frog who's stuck at the bottom of a well. Even if the strength of the Blizzard Silver City is sufficient to look disdainfully at the rest of the world, we still can't be careless. The old man sighed, but even his voice reflected a faint hint of pride as he said, we might be the overlords of this world, but no one can overlook that a man once challenged the might of the Blizzard Silver City 10 years ago. The little princess had come to this place to understand and experience the meaning of life, and had been allowed to travel unaccompanied by the Blizzard Silver City. If it hadn't been for that careless decision, then an ordinary man would never have been able to challenge us. The old man sighed again as his eyes narrowed. Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 138. An 8-faceted unrest. The moment the youngster heard the reference to the little princess, a ray of light gleamed in his eyes, reflecting a hint of desire and longing. It seemed that the youngster was attracted to the charms of the little princess, and had been pursuing her for a long time now. Inside the middle carriage sat a young girl, dressed in white-colored clothes, only 16 or 17 years in age by the looks of it. Her picturesque elegance couldn't be described in mere words, but her face reflected a hint of cleverness, and it would seem that she wasn't exactly a law-abiding citizen, and was probably on the naughtier side of the spectrum. At this time, due to the constant shaking of the carriage, she was holding the hand of the white-bearded man who was sitting next to her. "Third grandfather, why would you hide such things from me? You told me just enough to get me interested, so now you need to tell me more." The old man was sitting with his eyes closed, and didn't seem very different from a corpse at the moment. He opened his eyes and his face wrinkled, while his heart was inwardly cursing. "I'm finally beginning to realize why people are so afraid of her." No wonder the old man wanted the little princess to be escorted away. He just wanted to breathe a sigh of relief by removing his burdens, and he must even be rejoicing from the pains that she will inflict on the others. "If only I had known this earlier. Little girl, while we are away from the blizzard Silver City, I will tell you a story which is being talked most about these days. I can also tell you the story of the horses which look like dragons, or about how I got so old. Little girl, your grandfather is getting old now, and the story which you want to hear is over a decade old. So I don't really remember it very clearly anymore. Do you think that my old bones are lying to you?" The old man was almost on the verge of crying. Had he known about the little princess's temperament, then he would have spared himself from signing up for this errand. "I really hate this. When I received this news, I thought this will relieve me of my boredom and would help me in finding some inspiration. But it appears that I won't even be able to find any relief here. It would have been better if I tossed my old bones into a wreckage." "Why would you start the story and then suddenly stop it? You've left me hanging." The little princess pouted her mouth in distaste, while swaying her body like a pampered little baby. "Third grandfather, you've barely mentioned the Jun family, and that Jun Xie, and then you also told me that big sister shared a touching love story with that man, but then you haven't told me any further details." The third elder groaned. This story was a taboo inside the blizzard Silver City, and no one would talk about this affair very easily. He had only mentioned this story to her in order to stop her from troubling him, but little did the old man know that this tale would attract her interest, and would keep her imagination glued to it. She had been nagging him for more details ever since. "Allow my old bones some rest. You've been asking me about this since last night. It's been over 15 or 16 hours now. Younger brother, you come and tell the little princess a story. If you exchange positions with your elder brother this once, then I'll always owe you one." The third elder proposed an exchange in positions. "Well, only if you remember that you'll owe me one later. The word has it that there's an old lady in this empire who found a ghost with a long tongue which vomits blood. The ghost seeks beautiful princesses and drips blood on them." The sixth elder was clearly in no mood to be trifled with. "Ah, no. 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 I don't want to hear the sixth grandfather's story. I want to hear the third grandfather's story." The other old man hadn't even finished his sentence when the little princess cried out and hastily refused his narration. "Third brother, you see that I tried to take your place, but the little princes won't allow me to. Ha ha ha. Third brother, please don't forget that you still owe me one for trying. Ha ha. I guess it's your job to make the third princess happy again. Meanwhile, I can get some more sleep." The sixth elder started laughing out loudly. Despicable. Shameless. You have no code of brotherhood, the third elder cursed out in resentment. Third grandfather. Do you hate Schwer? Ah. The little princess's eyes instantly gleamed tearfully, and she made a crying face. What? How? The third elder denied flatly. I feel bad that Schwer even thought so. Then you have to tell me the story about Big Sister and Jun Yi. Otherwise it will mean that you hate Schwer. The little princess's face immediately transformed the look of anger to that of joy, and her joyful face started beaming a happy smile again. The third elder held his breath, praying that he'd faint. What sin's debt am I being forced to pay here? As the wheels rolled, the princess continued to chatter in high spirits, and didn't shut up for even a single minute. Even though the third elder was an able-bodied spirit Xian, his old wrinkles gradually continued to deepen from the torture, and as his spurts continuously left his body, his disposition started nearing that of a Tianxiang city beggar. In another direction, another team of people had been marching towards the Tianxiang imperial city. Guasher. Between you and me, this whole Xian Core incident is very risky. It is likely to bring more harm than good. The speaker was a thin-bodied middle-aged man dressed in black clothes, who was sitting on a horseback. The rigid lines on his face spoke of all the bitter tragedies of wars he had suffered in his life, which seemed to igniting a feeling of rage inside him. This border does look dangerous at first, but since the Yutang Empire has been living in peace for so many years now, so there shouldn't be much of a problem. Moreover, since the three princes of the Tianxiang Empire are wrangling for power at this point, we should push the wave and add to the billows so we can fish in troubled waters, and profit from the circumstances. Besides, with me around, even if the opposition army was equally matched in strength, I don't think that anyone will be able to stop me from leaving the Tianxiang city if I so chose to. The speaker was an elderly man dressed in white robes. His hands were tucked inside his sleeves, while his hale and hearty face exuded a very leisurely aura. Why would you wish to escort me through the Tianxiang Empire at your own risk? The threat is much greater for you than it is for me, since you've been at war with Jun family for years, and have killed so many of their men in action. Because of the wars that have been waged in the past, the Jun family's descendants are almost exhausted in number, so obviously this situation is far more dangerous for you than it is for me. Why is this dangerous for me? If the Jun family had the tendency of taking this opportunity to take a military action against me, then they simply wouldn't have been worthy of being called my enemy. The middle-aged man's cold face smiled calmly. They say that even if my victories were unwitting, they were still victories, but one thing is for certain. A few of the Jun family's members didn't die at my hands. In all fairness, the three brothers of the Jun family were better than me. As he said these words, his face suddenly exposed a color of humiliation, and he stated angrily, Jun Hui and his brothers have always been the enemies that I've most admired in my entire life, and I will probably never meet anyone as good as them. Even if I had died in the battlefield fighting against them, then I wouldn't have had a single complaint from my life. But the manner in which I won the war was no less than a shame for me. I have come to the Tianxiang city to escort you. Firstly, secondly, but more importantly, to find out how Jun Hui died. If he was killed behind his back, then even though he was my enemy, I will still avenge his death. The black-clothed middle-aged man's face was clearly expressing his anger. A man with his valor didn't deserve to die in the thickets of a conspiracy. I would expect such words from you. Gosher's face exposed a profound smile. Even though I've known you all these years, I still wondered if you ever tried to get him killed in secrecy. What would you even say that? If there was anyone who wanted the three Jun brothers dead in secrecy, then that was you. Not me. the black-clothed middle-aged man turned around to face his companion and glared at him. The frog at the bottom of the well always thinks that he's the best since there's no one around. Guo Shi's eyes were still calm in the face of his companion's glaring eyes. I can assure you that I had nothing to do with Jun Wuhui's death. Although I did intend on getting him killed. And I even made some arrangements. But in the end, I had no part in his death. Well, the middle-aged man's look changed to a very ferocious one as he shouted out, "That was a military matter. Why would you stick your nose into it?" He paused for a second. And then suddenly yelled out even louder, "Who are you to stick your nose into it?" Guo Shi was silent for a long time. Before he finally stated, "Zhao Jianhan. Some things aren't just military matters. Sometimes you also have to think about the country and your family." He was unable to finish his sentence and started gazing into the night sky in front of his eyes instead. Zhao Jianhan, the middle-aged man in black clothes, was the first general of the Yutang Empire and was Jun Wuhui, Jun Wumeng, and Jun Wuyi's sworn enemy. Zhao Jianhan smiled bitterly and said, "Jun Wuhui and Jun Wumeng might be dead, but Jun Wuyi is still alive. I will find my redemption one day, and only then will I be free from the humiliation of this victory." The 4 consecutive victories over these past years have really driven me mad. Did you know that? Zhao Jianhan looked up at the sky and sighed. In another direction, this border was being stained by another squadron, who had borne tremendous hardships to get here in time. This border was associated with the Xinxi Empire. The distant savannah was led by a middle-aged, black-clothed, iron-cladded man. Small flagon which was resting on his shoulders flew into the sky as his face exposed a gentle smile. A peak level 9 Xian beast's Xian core. That's indeed a good thing. If it wasn't for such a treasure, then I wouldn't have been able to exchange blows with some of the other heroes of this world. I live for these joys of life. This tall and straight-standing middle-aged man had a very slender body, and even though his face seemed very ordinary, it still exuded an unexplainable breathtaking charm. His long hair wasn't restricted in any way, and was flowing straight down his shoulders. His charismatic temperament had gained him the support of the savannah, and he was practically worshipped in his land. He stood overlooking the heavy blanket of darkness which covered the Tianxiang Empire, almost as if he was the creator of all beings. Tianxiang City. I've arrived. This man was known as the Falcon of the Savannah, and was one of the strongest of his generation. His looked in the sky and roared as the weather started to take a turbulent turn over the savannah. At this point, his troops scattered into numerous smaller factions, mostly comprising of 3 or 5 in number, and the largest faction was no greater than 12, while some men even went alone. But all teams had the same target in sight, the Tianxiang Imperial City. All these teams started to converge towards the Tianxiang Empire. At the same time, inside the distant Tianfa forest, all kinds of mysterious Xian beasts were flying above the forest at lightning speeds, disturbing the peace of the Tianfa forest with the fluctuation of the winds that they brought along with their tyrannical speeds. They rushed over the forest as they continued to carry forward. The animals inside the Tianfa forest were unable to understand the reason behind this suddenly human unrest. After a long while, a shocking roar sounded in the skies. If we allow a peak level 9 Xian core to fall into the hands of another, then it will be a shame like no other. This overwhelmingly thunderous sound caused a ruckus inside the hearts of the wildlife of the Tianfa forest, and left the living creatures of the forest trembling in fear. Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 139. Despised. The first ray of the morning sun was just beginning to light up the sky, But Jun Moxie's body was already covered in sweat from all the physical training that he'd been doing for the past few hours. He casually wiped off the sweat, put on his clothes and started walking towards the warehouse. Previously, his uncle had brought in some of the children which they had rescued from the donghua hall. Even though Jun Xie had ordered them to be sent them away to the manor, Jun Moxie still wasn't reconciled to bearing the cost of their unproductivity. He wished to see if any of these kids could pay the family back in some manner or the other. Sowing where you can't reap isn't a wise thing to do. Just because we saved them doesn't mean that we must bear their burden forever. And just because we're supporting them now doesn't mean that we're obligated to rear them forever. Even if a meat pie falls out of the sky, one have the flexibility to use their hands for protecting themselves. Otherwise the food will only hit you hard on the head and crush you to death. So, Jun Moxie went to take a look, but he didn't have any high expectation from them, and was only hoping that he'd find at least one or two who'd be worth training. After all, these boys and girls were already inspected for their value at the time of entering the donghua hall. After an hour of inspecting those children, Jun Moxie came out of the warehouse with a disappointed look on his face. The Huang Hall had completely rejected these children, and not without reason. These boys and girls were completely unfit for martial training. Therefore, left with other option, Jun Moxie decided to give up. If a batch of people with no talent is forced to train, then it would only be a waste of effort and resources, and would eventually force them to an early death. A large crowd of people had flocked in front of the Jun residence's door. Even though Jun Xie was a crippled man, he was still considered gentry in the Tianxiang city. When such a powerful and wealthy figure sends out a message for acquiring Xian beasts, how could every merchant in the city not swarm to his door? So, when the Jun residence's gatekeeper opened the front door, he was surprised to see a huge crowd gathered in front. This used to be a very common sight until 7 years ago. At the time when Jun Xie had first suffered his disability, Jun Zhantian had spared no effort to find the best doctors in the country to cure his only surviving son's disability. Upon realizing that his son's disability was incurable, the old man resorted to buying all kinds of treasures, rare objects and books to keep his son amused. The already disheartened Jun Xie was unable to bear his father's kindness, and would only pick up 1 or 2 items reluctantly. After several years of this, the father and son duo cleared the matter out and these activities were inevitably put to rest. But this time, the message was sent out on Jun Xie's initiative, and that too for acquiring a Xian beast. So naturally, every merchant in the Tianxiang city herded to his doorstep. Jun Xie sat in his wheelchair again, and slowly made his way towards the front of the line which was snaking out of the door. He had already understood Jun Moxie's intentions. If Jun Moxie had wanted to acquire a Xian beast, then he would have simply done it himself, and would have never bothered his uncle with it. Since he didn't wish to undertake this matter on his own, it can only mean one thing: Moxie doesn't want other people to find out that he's searching for Xian beasts. Or at least doesn't want people to know that these beasts are being bought for him. My nephew often acts in weird ways, but I have to admit that Moxie always puts a lot of thought into his actions, and is always very rational. Even though Jun Xie didn't know why his nephew wanted these beasts, he at least understood the reason behind Jun Moxie's request for the task to be done by someone else, which is why Jun Xie personally picked the beasts out from the lot. He deliberately picked out the best beasts from level 1 to level 5, and in fact, went one step further and picked a pair instead of just one, and sent the rest of them back. As far as level 6 or higher were concerned, he couldn't even find one merchant who was offering them. The entire Tianxiang city didn't even have a single level 6 Xian beast on sale. Even a damaged level 6 Xian beast was unavailable. Upon Jun Wuyi's command, these beasts were loaded into cages and were carried into his yard. Jun Moxie saw the commotion and came over. He made the servants wash those 10 beasts. The grade 1 beasts were rabbits. The level 2 beasts were winged raccoons. Level 3 beasts were wolves. Level 4's pick were bulls. And the level 5 Xian beasts were iron-skinned snakes. Jun Moxie waved his hands and asked the servants to leave. Then, he walked over to the first cage comprised of the 2 rabbits and stopped for a moment. The 2 rabbits didn't even open their eyes to look at him, and completely ignored his presence. He rubbed his nose and stationed himself in front of the cage with the winged raccoons, but still didn't get any response. Cage 3. But still no reaction. Jun Moxie was beginning to lose faith in his judgment and was beginning to wonder if he was wrong in making this assessment. But doing this halfway wasn't in the hitman's nature. And even though he didn't expect much, he walked over to the 4th cage. He suddenly heard a hiss sound which came from the cage beside the one he was standing in front of. The iron-skinned snakes in the cage besides had snaked towards the edge of their cage and were shaking their tails while their eyes were staring at Jun Moxie's body. Soon, the 2 bulls in the cage in front of him also opened their eyes to look at Jun Moxie. Jun Moxie's heart sprung up with joy. The confused bulls looked at him, then looked down, then looked up at him again, and then started looking around them, and then looked at Jun Moxie again. A ray of hope started to emerge in their eyes as they continued to stare at him, almost as if his body was exuding seeds of immortality, and it appeared that they were looking forward to something really good. The more distant cage with the snakes in it had already started to shake since the snakes were ceaselessly shaking their tails while banging their heads against their cage, and those 2 pairs of eyes were still firmly fixed at Jun Moxie. They seemed so anxious that if they hadn't been imprisoned in a cage, they would have already rushed towards the young Master Jun. Jun Wuyi was watching from the sidelines, and although he noted this strange behavior, he couldn't explain the reason behind it. Also, he couldn't help but notice that his nephew was seemingly indifferent in the face of this anomaly. Jun Moxie calmly took a couple of steps backwards as his face remained expressionless, defying the ecstasy of his heart. Only a pig wouldn't understand the meaning of this. Either the art of unlocking the heaven's fortune or the Hongjun Pagoda, or both were mysteriously causing these Xian beasts to get attracted towards Jun Moxie. This soul discovery itself was worth a priceless treasure. What was the most dangerous place in the entire Xian continent? If this topic was ever raised, then no one would say the Blizzard Silver City, because even though the Blizzard Silver City was very powerful and arrogant, even they wouldn't take a man's life without any reason. However, there was one place on this continent which would. And everyone was aware of this place. So even the most ordinary of men would only give one answer: the Tianfa forest. The paradise of Xian beasts and the infernal hell of humans. Even if a peak spirit Xian ventured into the Tianfa forest, then they were quite likely to lose their life to the dangers of the forest. But Jun Moxie didn't need to afraid of it anymore. But what did this mean? What items are considered most valuable in the Xian continent? High-grade herbs, healing dawn, Xian qi fruits, Xian beasts Xian cores, or Xian beasts cubs. And were all these rarities produced in abundance? The answer will still remain the same: the Tianfa forest. No one had dared to venture out into the depths of this forest for millions of years. However, Jun Moxie's body seemed to be attracting high-end Xian beasts' love and affection. This could be the best way to increase strength and become rich. However, Jun Moxie still wasn't convinced if relying on Xian Dan and herbs was a good way to increase power and upgrade the art of unlocking the heaven's fortune. Jun Moxie's heart was beginning to feel a strange sense of agitation. And just then the Hongjun Pagoda started to spin. This rotation of the Hongjun Pagoda ignited a very special and wonderfully strange feeling in his heart, like he was despised or laughed at, almost like someone was carrying a mountain of gold, but would be required to beg people for food, only to be mocked at in the end. This sentiment left Jun Moxie feeling very unhappy all of a sudden. It seems that I have an issue. But Jun Moxie really didn't know what this problem was, but could sense that it was a big problem nonetheless. In fact, he felt like the beggar who was holding a gold bowl in his hands, but was still begging people for rice. His heart perceived a feeling of emptiness, but he really didn't know how to overcome it. This is such a great tragedy. If one must compare Jun Moxie to a beggar with an expensive bowl in his hands, then a diamond bowl would be more suited in this situation. In fact, no matter how valuable his bowl was, he'd still have to beg for rice. As the Hongjun Pagoda started to spin, almost all the Xian beasts' cages came to life. In fact, the beasts who hadn't taken any notice of his presence earlier, namely the level 1, 2, and 3 beasts, were also staring at Jun Moxie now, while constantly banging their bodies against their cages, almost as if they simply couldn't wait to rush out of their cages and land straight into Jun Moxie's arms. Jun Xie was staring in disbelief from the sidelines. How is this happening? What is Moxie doing? He's just been walking back and forth since he's arrived here, and seemingly hasn't done anything. But then why are the Xian beasts acting out in this manner? What is going on here? At this point, a servant came in and reported, "The young miss of the Dugu family has arrived." Please subscribe to this channel, so that we are more enthusiastic in providing the best video for you. Chapter 140. Forcing the Hongjun Pagoda. Jun Moxie's mouth curved into a pleased smile as he waved his hand. That's just great, his experiment had been successful. He said, "These," as he pointed to the cages in front, "are useless now. Have them removed from here." The servant hastily gathered a few more servants, and then they all carried the cages away. Those Xian beasts are useless? Jun Xie opened his eyes wide as he stared at his nephew in disbelief. Well, yes. They are useless now. Jun Moxie smiled again. "Third uncle." Uncle, if you're planning on killing those snakes for meat, then count me in as well. Snake meat is excellent for the human body's nourishment. Kill the snakes, for meat? Jun Xie opened his mouth with the intention of scolding Jun Moxie. "We spent hundreds of thousands of taels in buying these beasts. You asked me to buy them just last night, and they are already useless to you. All you did was parade around them for 2 minutes. Those 2 iron-bodied snakes are level 5 Xian beasts. And they are completely intact as well. I spent over 200,000 taels on them alone. You want me to make a meal out of snakes which costed 200,000 taels." He was just about to start his rant when they heard a mighty rumbling sound. Dugu Xiaoyi walked into the courtyard, being escorted by 7 big and burly men. Dugu Xiaoyi looked even more beautiful, refined and elegant in the contrast of her 7 brothers. Her rolled-up black hair looked slightly fluffy, which were being held in place by a crystal hairpin. Her white face looked even more tender and delicate, while her cheery lips were curved in a smile which revealed a hint of joy and bashfulness at the same time. A white shawl covered her light green dress, which gently caressed body right down to her waistline. Although the young maiden's body appeared somewhat immature and unripe, it was still curvy and exquisite in its make. The young maiden stood in the doorway, while her body gleamed brilliantly in the rays of the morning sun. A gentle breeze fluttered past her sleeves. Not many people were capable of matching her grace. Jun Xie stared at his nephew, who was looking at the young girl, almost as if he had never seen such a sight in his life before. Even Jun Moxie couldn't help admire her beauty, and was for a moment lost in the beauty of the moment. What are you looking at? Never seen a beautiful woman before, ah? Duguing growled unhappily as his burly body stepped sideways, blocking his sister from Jun Moxie's line of sight. It seemed that Dugu Xiao Yi's 7 brothers weren't very happy about their sister visiting the Jun residence. Oh, how are my beloved Dugu brothers doing, ah? Do you want some more wine? We have plenty more. Jun Moxie narrowed his eyes. Duguing suddenly burst out in a loud voice, "Don't look so proud, you fooled us into drinking that stupid wine of yours." He suddenly grunted heavily as his face started reflecting a color of embarrassment. After returning home last night, Dugu Xiao Yi obviously ran straight to her brother's chambers since Yi Gu Han's words had gotten her worried about their well-being. When she reached the door, she saw that her 7 huge brothers were sitting around the dinner table, and had already overturned the large porridge cauldron which had been sitting on top of the table. One really couldn't blame them for toppling over the cauldron. Jun Moxie's wine had burnt off their stomachs, and they couldn't even digest greasy food items at the moment, let alone meat. No meat and no alcohol for a complete week had left these 7 men moaning, groaning and hungry. For such big men, eating porridge 3 meals a day for survival was nothing short of torture. Ah! Did that Jun Moxie bully you? And why have you all lost so much weight? I just saw you guys a few days ago. Tell me what he did. I'll teach him a lesson. Dugu Xiao Yi was extremely shocked and angry upon seeing the plight of her 7 brothers. However, her words aroused a sense of embarrassment in her 7 brothers, and they all simultaneously thought the same thing. What? Did she just say that Jun Moxie bullied us? That guy can't even lay a finger on us. And she thinks he bullied us? That's a joke. He did give us that wine, but we got greedy after a few glasses. That's all that happened that day. Although that wine was really good, ah. Bah. Did you just say Jun Moxie? Ha. 3rd brother slapped that little guy to the ground the other day. Do you really think that a guy as small as him could ever bully us? Haha. Xiao Yi. You're joking, right? Come on, brothers. Tell her about it. Dugu Hao opened his mouth to brag. That's right. 6th brother and I kicked him, and stamped on him. You should have seen the look on his face. If it wasn't for father's presence, we would have run him over. Ha ha ha. Dugu Shang started boasting shamelessly. But I heard that Jun Moxie leveled you all to the floor. This information was given to me by a very reputable source. Her 7 brothers missed out the wrinkling of her eyebrows. They inflicted so much pain on him, and he didn't even complain about it. Do you really think that Jun Moxie has the ability to put the 7 of us to ground? That's just a rumor. And a blatant lie. That's all. Dugu Xiong stood up and rolled his sleeves up, revealing his thick and hairy arms, and pumped his muscles into a knot. Xiao Yi. I'm sure that Jun Moxie planted this rumor to settle old scores with us. Since he couldn't touch us, he's just using these rumors to comfort himself. That's right. He's just hoping that repeating his rumors will make them a fact. We didn't just beat up Jun Moxie that day. We also demolished his house. But those few jars of Dugu Chong rushed over and covered Dugu Jie's mouth. Don't talk to me, how could you? You treated him that way. His body is so weak. How could you do that to him? How can you do this? Dugu Xiao Yi became even angrier upon hearing these words. Distressed, She suddenly started whining, "Don't you guys have any heart?" They had certainly overdone it. The 7 brothers started looking at each other with a confused and embarrassed look on their faces. And then those 14 eyeballs looked back at Xiao. Then what do we say, Our stomachs have been completely perforated by that man. And we aren't even allowed to run our mouths now? Xiao started stomping her feet as she continued to sob, You were too hard on him. I can no longer look at you. I hate you." Suddenly she turned around and ran crying out of the room. What was that about? Xiong looked the rest of his brothers with a confused look on his face. No idea. His 6 remaining brothers looked just as confused as him, and shook their heads from left to right in unison simultaneously. Wudi happened to be passing by their chambers at that time, and was enraged to his daughter leaving their room in tears. He aggressively charged into their room and grabbed the 7 of them, and then taught them a lesson. Later, when Xiao asked permission to visit the Jun residence, the entire Dugu family naturally opposed it. They had taken such extensive measures to separate the 2 of them, and then allowing her to visit the Jun family's home after all that effort would be simply outrageous. Xiao resorted to her own means in order to get her way, and burst into tears. Faced with her tears, all the 3 generations of the Dugu family surrendered to her will. However, they made a condition of their own: you can go, but you must go along with trusted family or friends, meaning, she would be accompanied there by her 7 brothers. And thus, she ended up being accompanied by a huge and powerful retinue instead of traveling alone to the Jun residence. In fact, Little White had been the first one to take a stand on going to the Jun residence. He had jumped down to the ground, and had turned his head to look pitifully at the Dugu elderly. Then he had turned his head to face Xiong, and had glared fiercely at him and his brothers, "Don't you dare to stop me. I can't wait to jump into Jun Moxie's arms." Even though Little White was just a cub, and even though his body's growth and development hadn't yet started, he was still carried the blood and the pride of an advanced Xian beast's race. He simply didn't wish to deal with such annoyance. "If I were a grown-up, then I would have bitten your ears off. You don't know who the real big guy around here is." Jun Moxie looked smilingly at Xiao. "You look very nice today, Miss Dugu. I really can't take my eyes off you." Xiao's face suddenly started to glow, and she replied back, "You really think that I look pretty? I thought that you hadn't noticed me yet." Her mind was playing a completely different tune. He called me Miss Dugu instead of little girl. That's so much more pleasing to hear from his mouth. Jun Moxie hastily replied, "How could that be?" However, he had already started pushing out his body's energy into the Hongjun Pagoda in the hope of starting its rotations. Little White was within arm's reach, so obviously wanted to experiment a bit. This was the first time that Jun Moxie was intentionally trying to initiate the Hongjun Pagoda's revolutions. Boom! His energy started penetrating through to the Hongjun Pagoda. The Hongjun Pagoda suddenly started spinning at high speeds, and started emitting rainbow-colored rays, which were at least 10 times more powerful than ever before. A strong and powerful aura started to flood out of the pagoda, with the intensity of a tsunami's waves. This story will be continued to chapter 141. For those of you who are not subscribed yet, please subscribe. The interesting and best stories will be updated. See you again in the next episode.